Sixth grade, happy Monday. Welcome to be back at it. January 4th, getting our education on. We're moving on to Chapter 10 in history. Chapter 10 is early China, as you can see. And China is going to kind of take us back a little bit. It's not one of the, it is one of the great river civilizations. So we spent a couple chapters talking about Greece. They were not a great river civilization. Then last chapter we were in India with the Indus River. That was a great river civilization. People grew up around a river that supplied them with the agriculture they needed. China's another one of those. So we always talk about the four: Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and China, the great river civilizations. Let's get started as we talk about this chapter. You can see we're going to go back from 1750 BC all the way into 220 AD. So we're going to cover about 2,000 years. We're going to learn about this guy. His name is Confucius. Confucius is considered to be one of early China's great teachers. Thousands of years after his death, his teachings are still followed. During his lifetime, Confucius taught people that there was a way to build a better life for themselves and for society. To do that, he said, people must put their needs of their families and community above their own wants. He urged people to honor traditions and seek knowledge. The teachings of Confucius spread throughout China. His legacy includes a respect for education and the importance of fulfilling all duties towards one's parents and community. That philosophy influences many Asian countries today. Before we even get started, guys, you got extra credit up here on the top of your page. He's so popular that I had to study him in college. So wrote right up here at the top, Mr. Bauer studied Confucius. He literally, his followers wrote a book, and it was part of the curriculum that we had to do in college. That's how well his teachings are known. So it's more than just Asian countries today. It's literally around the world. Okay. Now, as we look at this, guys, you can see China is absolutely massive. Keep in mind, as we talk about China and we look at it in ancient times, guys, the size of it changes with time. You have your double timelines here that we're talking about. This is some of the big things that we're going to cover on the top here compared to some of the things that we've studied or will be studying in the blue down there. One of the big things that we'll talk about in China is the Great Wall of China that they started to build, and we'll talk about the dynasties that did that. All right, let's get to lesson one. Lesson one is the start of the Chinese civilization. The essential question is, what makes a culture unique? And today it says China is one of the world's most powerful countries in every aspect, guys. Huge population, obviously, very large, and economically it is monstrous. America has the biggest economy, guys, but China is growing very, very fast with a completely different philosophy than we have. Let's get going. The ancient civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and India developed along large river. Hundreds of years later, in East Asia, the Chinese civilization began along the Huang He. Okay, so you got your first blank there, guys, and what we have to be able to do is read some of the Chinese that comes. So do your best. So they give you the pronunciation, but call it however you want. So you heard me say Huang He. The reason I said Huang He instead of Huang He is that helps me spell it. Okay, this is not pronounced he. This is pronounced he in English, but it's not that in Chinese, guys. But do what you need to do so that you can pronounce it correctly. In Chinese, Huang He means yellow river. The civilization was China. This civilization was China. China had gone through many changes over the centuries, but it's still a strong and growing civilization today. The Huang He stretches east across China for more than 2,900 miles. So you have number 2 in your notes there. It begins in China's western mountains and flows to the Pacific Ocean. Okay, so you can see, guys, here we're going to start talking about these rivers down here. One river that we're going to talk about, and the second river is up top there. I'll click it, see if I can get it a little bit bigger for you guys.
Notice the size of modern China compared to the United States.
Awesome. So this is Huang He, which is known as the Yellow River, and it comes out of there.
All right,
I got to see if I can figure out how to get that thing out of there. All right. So you got the river. We're going to talk about this one, and in a second we'll talk about the one on the bottom. It begins in China's western mountains. It flows to the Pacific Ocean. On its way, the Huang He cuts through thick layers of rich yellow soil. This soil is called loess, or if you want to pronounce it, los. The river carries away large amounts of loess and spreads it further downstream. The yellow color of the soil then in the Huanghe gives it its name. So you understand why we call it a yellow river, because it literally looks yellow because of the type of soil it picks up. The rich soil helps farmers grow large amounts of food on small plots of land. As a result, the Huanghe Valley emerged as one of the great wheat producing areas in the ancient world. So you have number 3 in your notes, guys. Remember, I'm taking a few things that I'm keeping in mind from this first page. Number 1, here's your river civilizations: Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and China. Number 2, why it's called the Yellow River. So one of the things I'll ask you on your test is name a river and then give me its English translation. So Chinese, Huanghe; English, Yellow River. Why? Because of the less, and it's producing wheat. Wheat is a staple crop. Let's learn more about the river. The Huanghe has benefited the people in the Huanghe Valley. The river has also brought great misfortune. The Huanghe often overflows its banks, causing enormous floods. Since 600 BC, the Chinese have recorded more than 1,500 floods of the Huanghe. These floods have taken millions of lives. The Chinese call the Huanghe China's sorrow in honor of the people killed by the flood. Okay, so you got number 4 in your notes, guys. Now you have 3 different names for that river. You have the Chinese name, Huanghe, you have the English translation, Yellow River, and you got the nickname, China's Sorrow. Now, one thing I want to point out about that, guys, is one awesome thing about the Chinese culture. They literally have records that are over 2,000 years old. They have recorded since 600 BC. So this is not oral tradition, guys. This is facts that they have recorded for that. I think that's pretty cool how old this civilization is and how long it's lasted, that we have the records for. Over time, the people of China moved south and settled near another great river called the Shangjiang. That's number 5 in your notes, guys, as you're moving through this. So, hey, some of us would look at this and say, why would you live next to a river that's flooded 1,500 times? Well, some people did move, guys. Others, you have to understand, there's no choice. I need to be near a river. It's either that or starve to death. My choices aren't the greatest, right? It has another name. Today, if you look at maps, it'll be called the Yangtze River on half the time. So once again, now you have another thing. The Shangjiang flows from west to east across central China. It flows through the spectacular canyons and broad plains on its way to the East China Sea. The Shangjiang is 3,915 miles long. Only the Amazon in South America and the Nile in Africa are longer. Like the Huanghe, the Shangjiang provides rich soil for farming. Early farmers grew rice along the river's shores. The Shangjiang is also an important waterway for trade and transportation. Okay, so you have number 6 in your notes, guys, with trade there. Like the Huanghe, you have Huanghe, Yellow River, or China's Sorrow. This one is Shangjiang, Yangtze River, and this translates, guys, as Long River. Now, why do we translate to the Long River? Because it's the 3rd longest river in the world. Nile, number 1, Amazon, number 2, Shangjiang, number 3. Huanghe, you grew wheat. Shangjiang, you grew rice. And so lots of times when we hear China, we think of rice, guys. That's more down here in southern China. Up here in northern China, they grew wheat because of the geography of the land. All right, China has fertile river valleys, but only about 1/10 of its land can be farmed. Mountains and desert cover much of the country's land. To the southwest, the towering Himalayas separate China from South Asia. The Kulan Shan and Tian Shan mountain ranges slice through northwestern China. East of the Taishan is a vast rocky desert known as the Gobi. So you have number 7 in your notes, guys, the Shan there, and then you have the Gobi Desert, so there's 2 blanks for number 7. And what you're going to realize from this, guys, as I look at this, I have major mountains here, major mountains here, major desert here. It's kind of isolating China. And so China in its history sometimes is going to close its borders kind of because of the natural thing. It should remind you of Egypt. Egypt kind of had that. For centuries, these rugged mountains and barren desert acted like walls around the country. These barriers limited contact between China and other civilizations. The Chinese developed a unique culture and a strong sense of independence. They called their land the Middle Kingdom. To them, it was the center of the world. So you have number 8 in your notes, guys, about their unique culture because it wasn't influenced by outsiders. They developed their own independence. Now, they're known as the Middle Kingdom, but don't think, does that mean there's a kingdom here and a kingdom here and they're in the middle? No. They're literally the middle of the universe, the center of the world. That's why they called themselves that. So kind of like our belief system that the sun revolved around the earth in ancient times. We're like, hey, the earth is the most important. It's because we live on it, so we're the center of the universe. China took it a step farther and said, on this earth, we're the center of this world. It all revolves around us because they were cut off from everybody else. What we know about the early people of China comes from the things they left behind. Archaeologists have unearthed clay pots and cups in the Huanghe Valley that date back thousands of years. These artifacts show that the Huanghe Valley was the birthplace of the Chinese civilization. So you have number 9 in your notes, guys. What they're saying is, as we dig things up and we discover and try to date them, we discovered that the artifacts up here are older than the artifacts down there. That's why they call it the birthplace. Archaeologists think that people settled in the valley because of its rich soil. Early settlers farmed the land. As in other early civilizations, people here also used the river for travel and trade. As the population grew, the Chinese began building towns. So you have number 10 in your notes because of that rich soil, and you can see what they're saying here, guys, is what we always talk about. Get by a river, have it flood, have it deposit silt. Silt leads to farming, what we call agriculture. Agriculture leads to that surplus. Surplus leads to specialization. Specialization leads to trade. Trade allows me to stay in one spot, and voila, I have a civilization. Like other early people, the ancient Chinese created myths to explain the creation of the world. Many Chinese myths celebrate the deeds of the great heroes. Scroll that up so you can continue to follow along. Yu the Great was one of these heroes. According to myths, Yu dug the first channels to control the floodwaters of the Huanghe. That's number 11 in your notes. As you continue to move along here, so he's going to help them out. Yu chased away the dragon that caused the floods. Then he started digging the channels. According to the myth, Yu was aided in his task by other dragons. One dragon used its tail to help dig the channels. Still, it took 13 long years to complete the work. After the channels were finished, the floodwaters could flow safely away to the sea. So you can see the legend. Legend has it Yu founded China's first dynasty. That dynasty was named Shai. It began around 2000 BC. Archaeologists, however, have not found any historical evidence of this dynasty. Based on written records, China's first dynasty is the Shang. Shang kings ruled China from 1750 to 1045. Okay, guys, so when I ask you what's the first dynasty in China, it's this one. It's the Shang. And so you got to make sure you understand that. They have this great story about these dragons and everything else, and if you're this legendary, hero, you started the civilization, it's not true, guys. It's just a fantastic, neat story. And so archaeologists say we have to go with what we have evidence of. This, the only thing we can say now, it's a myth, because we haven't found any evidence of it. So the first dynasty that we're going to talk about, guys, is the Shang dynasty. This is what we know about the Shang dynasty. Archaeologists have unearthed long buried walls and buildings. These ruins show that the Shang built the first cities in China. Among these cities was the royal capital of Anyang. A palace and temple stood at the center of the city. Public buildings and homes of government officials circled this central area. Beyond the city center stood workshops and other homes. So I hope you see the common pattern here. In the middle of my city, the most important people, a palace and a temple. Then the government officials, then the workers around that, and then would be your farmers around that. The king was the most powerful person, serving as the political, religious, and military leader of Shang China. At first, Shang kings controlled only a small area of northern China. In time, let me click on this map so you can see that in all of China, this is what the Shang Empire was. In time, the Shang conquered neighboring areas. They ruled over most of the people of the Huang He River Valley. As the Shang kingdom grew, kings sent out large armies to defend the kingdom's borders. They appointed people called warlords to govern local territories. Warlords are military leaders who lead their own armies. Shang kings relied on warlords to stay in power. And so it's guys, when you hear this warlords thing, is what happens is we conquer an area, but China can go out and conquer. Now it's like, okay, how can we keep this under there? So we let the local warlord say, you control this area. You collect the taxes, you run this for us, you give us a little kickback, and we'll let you be in control there. Now, what can the warlord do? He can raise taxes and pocket that money himself. But overall, you had to do that because Shang itself wasn't strong and powerful enough to govern it all itself. That's going to obviously cause some problems when these warlords start to conflict with each other, or say, you know what, I don't want to send any money back to you. I don't think you're strong enough to come get me. I'm pretty strong here. So that's a challenge with that. Okay, under the king, warlords and other royal officials formed the upper class. They are aristocrats, people of noble birth whose wealth came from the land they owned. Aristocrats passed their land and power to their children or to younger family members. Most people in Shang China were farmers, always something to note when it comes to tests. There were much smaller groups of merchants, artisans, and slaves. So most people were farmers, and then you have these other ones, guys, and you even have slavery, but notice it's a much smaller amount. So in some of those ancient civilizations we talked about, slavery was huge, not so much in China. The farmers lived in rural villages, worked the land that belonged to the aristocrats. They raised cattle, sheep, and chickens, and grew grains such as millet, wheat, and rice. People in Shang China worshiped many gods. The god Shang Ti ruled as supreme god over the lesser gods. According to legend, the gods lived in the mountains, rivers, and seas. So you can see they're polytheistic. Early Chinese both admired and feared the gods. They believed the gods could bring good and bad fortune. They attempted to please the gods by offering gifts of food and other goods. The Chinese also honored their ancestors or long dead family members. They made offerings to their ancestors. They hoped that their ancestors would bring good luck and help them in difficult times. Today, many Chinese still pay respect to their ancestors by going to temples and burning small paper copies of food, clothing, and other items. Okay, so you have number 13 finally in your notes. And you can just see what they've done, guys, over time. Back in ancient times, what do? We literally offered sacrifices, didn't we? Today, what do? We burn paper copies of it. In other words, we don't really want to watch the lamb go up in smoke anymore. That's food. So we look at like the Israelites who burned lambs. We're like, man, that's a waste. But I'm going to give you a paper copy. These copies represent things that departed relatives need in the afterlife. So here's what I'm going to give to you. Shang kings believed that they received the power to rule from the gods and their wisdom from their ancestors. So you have now number 14 in your notes. So you can see how we're putting mythology and ancestry together. So I get the power from the gods, I get my wisdom from my ancestors. For this reason, religion and government were closely linked. For the kings, an important duty was to contact the gods and the ancestors before making important decisions. The kings asked for help by using oracle bones. Number 15 in your notes. What are oracle bones? It says, they were instructed priests to scratch questions on the bones, such as, will I win the battle, or will there be an abundant harvest? Priests heated the oracle bones over a fire until they cracked. The pattern of the cracks provided answers from the gods and ancestors to the king's questions. Awesome. Okay, so guys, we look at oracle bones, and, and we might think they're a little bit crazy, but extra credit number 2 in your notes, you can write down oracle bones in Bible. Guys, tons of people do that. You believe life is connected. You believe you are offering sacrifice. So think of ancient Egypt. I'm offering this lamb as a sacrifice to God. God's happy that I do that. So then they got the idea, well, how can a God talk to me? Well, let's use one of these bones. Let's write a question on it. Will I win the battle? Let's put it in the fire. It's going to crack from the heat. I'm going to look at that and say, this is the answer from the gods. Okay, so guys, it's happened in ancient times. You and I might look at that and say, that's the dumbest thing ever. You're burning a bone and you think it's going to answer the questions. I agree. I don't think it's smart, but we can't pass judgment on that as far as it makes sense if you think about it of this is how I offered sacrifices. All right, 6, we're going to stop there for today. We'll pick it up as we start learning about their pictographs and their ideas of writing as we continue to talk about the Shang Dynasty. Have a great day.